Steve Jobs was a visionary leader. He founded Apple, launched the Mac, created the iPhone, so he was a fantastic CEO, right? Wrong, because many experts argue that Steve Jobs was not always a good manager.
We went out and hired a bunch of professional management. It didn't work at all. Most of them were bozos. They knew how to manage, but they didn't know how to do anything. Now turn on. Here. Okay. We'll let an expert see if he can turn it on.
This year, Tim Cook became the longest-serving CEO of Apple, surpassing Jobs. And it's shocking to see that it was Cook who managed to grow Apple to this $4 trillion behemoth, which is unheard of in history. Not only that, Cook expanded the company into sectors that were unthinkable.
I care very much about our users, and I strongly believe that if they're happy over the long term, other things will take care of itself. And so we had a lot of confidence, and for us, it's about the long term.
So I wonder, what makes a great manager? What mistakes kill a business? And is a great manager the same as a great leader? A leader is everything in a company. It's the one who makes or kills the business, but more often than not, leaders can actually endanger their own company. So let's roll back the clock to 1976. Meet the famous Steves, Wozniak and Jobs. Two fellows from California, they realized computers weren't just for labs or nerds.
It was taking a little device that was designed to talk to computers by typing on a keyboard and getting your answers back in text over a slow modem. And it was designed to save cost in parts to work very slowly.
They founded Apple, a company that sold computer components so their customers could build computers themselves. A year later, venture capital jumped in and Apple really took off. Now, while Wozniak focused mostly on engineering, Steve Jobs was the salesman, and the real climb began. We've all seen the movies, we all know the stay hungry, stay foolish, but then why did Steve Jobs almost crash Apple? By the way, Steve Jobs was never CEO in the 70s or 80s. He actually was a co-founder and member of the board. Then, why wasn't he a CEO? That's mostly because Mike Markula, one of Apple's financial backers, wanted someone more experienced. But there's another reason.
Apple's board told Jobs he needed adult supervision. Jobs and the board went through about 20 candidates, most in the tech sector, but Jobs vetoed them all.
It's because people criticized Steve Jobs' lack of management skills. See, since the beginning, Steve Jobs was a visionary, a genius who could see 20 years into the future. The kind of guy who knew what people wanted before they even knew what they needed. He was a leader who could turn a company upside down, but he wasn't a stable manager. He was confrontational, even verbally aggressive, and would lash out massively on peers and employees. Sure, he could build amazing products, but he was volatile. He clashed with CEO John Sculley and ended up playing a coup to take control of Apple.
The big blow-up between Steve and me was never about the future of his vision. It was because Steve was discouraged that the Mac wasn't selling in 1985.
When the Macintosh office failed, Steve went into a deep depression over it, because this was really important to him.
But John learned about it beforehand, and people sided against Jobs. This led to Steve Jobs being fired and kicked out of his own company in 1985.
September 1985, when Steve Jobs stepped down from Apple Computer, effectively squeezed out of the company he co-founded barely a decade earlier.
Meanwhile, the sales of Macintosh crashed, and the company was in a crisis. That's exactly when a leading genius is not the right manager. So he was out of Apple for 11 years. But when he came back in 1997, he was a changed man. And from a theory leader, he turned into a competent manager. He finally became CEO, and that's when the company skyrocketed. But how? Well, Jobs' leadership style is based on a few pillars, and they're both good and bad. The first pillar was his unique organizational structure. When Steve Jobs became CEO, Apple had the same structure as many rival companies. It was divided into business units, and all those units had their own P&L. In other words, they all acted like standalone entities, each responsible for their own profitability. Now, he ripped it out and adopted what's called a functional organization. So he fired all general managers of all those business units in just one day. He put the whole company under only one P&L and divided expertise according to function. So instead of dividing the company by products like iPod, iPhone, Mac, it was divided by functions. For example, engineering, hardware, sales. And this follows his principle that experts should lead. Only people who have true expertise should have any decisive rights. Most big companies don't use a functional organization even today. Major companies tend to be organized into business units where unit leaders call the shots. And most business theory encourages units. But Jobs said, no thanks. So Apple is still the odd one out. The second pillar was user experience. Jobs had that obsessive attention to product detail. His mantra was product before profits. So he couldn't care less about maximizing profits if the product wasn't right. It was all about creating a product that would blow customers' minds. And the product had to be spotless, even if that meant running tests for months on end. The third pillar was pushing the limits. Jobs' biographer reveals how Jobs believed that in order to be a market leader, he had to push his people to the limit. One time he asked Wozniak to create a video game, to which Woz responded, well, it's going to take a few months to do it. But Jobs pushed him to do it in just 4 days. He pushed and pushed until Woz ended up achieving what Jobs wanted. By the way, between 1997 and 2011, Apple's stock went up more than 14,000%. So all things considered, everybody was happy, right? Right. But only while it lasted. Because there was a huge problem on the horizon. When Steve Jobs was diagnosed with an illness at Apple, everybody panicked. Many thought the company would not survive without Jobs. Because how can you outperform a leader like that? A famous study in economics categorizes business leaders using 4 factors. General ability, which means how much brain power you've got. Execution versus interpersonal, which means the doers versus the smooth talkers. Charisma versus analytic, the charmers versus the brain surgeons. And strategic versus managerial, which means the visionaries versus the commanders. Of course, I wouldn't get too cozy with these categories because people aren't static computers and you can't reduce anyone to an archetype. But using these factors, you'd say the new Steve Jobs was more charismatic than analytical, and definitely execution-driven rather than interpersonal, who would be more concerned about creating consensus in the team. And Apple did really well. But what happens if you replace him with the opposite? And that opposite was Tim Cook. He came over from Compaq and he was hands-on, humble and low profile. Cook was trained personally by Jobs. He was initially hired to fix Apple's supply chain, which was a total mess. Not only did Cook handle that problem quickly, he achieved outstanding results, including as a CEO, making Apple the first company to reach 1, and then 2, and then 3, and now $4 trillion market cap.
Apple flew past $4 trillion in market value for the first time on Tuesday. It became the third big tech company to hit the milestone.
As a leader type, he's not a charmer, but he's a brain surgeon, an analytical manager who's all about operations, supply chain, and team building. People around Cook say that he will bury you with questions, but he actually wants to hear what you think. Where Jobs excelled in launching products like iPhones and Macs, Cook launched Apple into the world of services like Apple Pay, Apple Music, Apple TV, and so on. This allowed them to reach a scale like never before. So the question isn't what leader or manager is the best, but which one do you need at a specific moment in your company? I said earlier that a leader can endanger a company. But how? What can go wrong? And what harm can they do? Often, when people think of charismatic leaders that capture investors' interest, they probably think of this guy. Charismatic? Well, Elon Musk is a disruptive leader. Let's give him that. Definitely a visionary and an innovator who's great at keeping the public's attention. I mean, he literally bought a social media platform to keep people's attention. He invested a lot of time and effort into electric cars before anyone else did. And now he's pretty much into satellites, brain chips, rockets. But here's where things get a little complicated. At the moment, Tesla trades at the highest price-to-earnings ratio compared to any automaker in the world. I mean, we're talking over 250 times earnings. To give you an idea, Volkswagen's price-to-earnings ratio is 5. 5 versus 250. And yet, Volkswagen's revenue is way more than Tesla, almost 4 times more.
Look at their gross margin, 17.5%. Tesla was 21%. But Tesla gets a big rebate every year. That's a big chunk of the 21%. That accounts for about 6%. You take that out, Tesla is actually lower than Volkswagen's gross margin. That means in every unit they sell, Tesla makes less money as a percentage of the revenue than Volkswagen.
So are traders going crazy? Not necessarily. That's because Tesla is not traded as a car company, but rather as a company working in, what are they working in? Self-driving cars, robotics, space exploration. Oh wait, it's actually SpaceX. Okay, fine. Even then, whatever they are working on, Microsoft and Apple are around 40 price to earnings. Nvidia is 54. We are still far out. Sure, they're not as futuristic as Tesla, but that means the valuation is mostly due to Elon Musk's visionary ideas and people's trust in his ability to bend reality. This is not always bad, but it could be problematic because Musk does have a history of not delivering on his promises. Some, if not many, of his ideas have been either postponed repeatedly or remain totally unresolved. So, while he's very charismatic in articulating his futuristic vision, his execution skills and some questionable decisions are a bit of a risk factor. Tesla does look like it's built on future promises and Musk's vision, not current fundamentals. And actually, in my previous video, I talked about Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos. She was trying to bend reality too. She did have a revolutionary idea and made science fiction style of promises. And you know what happened to Theranos. If you haven't watched that video, you can watch it next. But look, I'm not saying Musk is Holmes, but sometimes it does feel like watching a one-man show. And that kind of setup can get a bit risky in the long run. The opposite can be said of this guy. Buffett is as stable as it gets. I mean, with a net worth of around $150 billion, he still lives in a house in Omaha he bought in 1958 for $31,000.
His humble tastes have humble origins.
Yeah, that is true. It was a Sears Roebuck house, and in those days they called it Sears Roebuck, not Sears.
And allegedly still has breakfast from McDonald's every day. How's that even possible? Was he that guy from Super Size Me? I think it was somebody else. Anyway, Buffett bought his first stock at age 11 and was already filing taxes by the age of 13. Talk about early starts, right? He understood right away that his business was about patience and steadiness, and this reflects big time in his leadership style. Buffett bought the textile company Berkshire Hathaway and later used it as a holding company to make investments.
Determined to not only save Berkshire Hathaway, but to transform it into an empire, it's a gamble that would define his career and reshape the world of finance forever.
He's a big believer in value investing and knows that time is his greatest ally. Value investing is a strategy where investors buy companies that they believe are trading below their true worth, because those companies are not as interesting as Tesla. Companies like Chevron, Coca-Cola, American Express, like boring stuff. So don't expect Buffett to appear on stage with a chainsaw. Oh, maybe he could. Who knows these days? But compared to Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, you could say that between execution and interpersonal, Buffett is definitely more interpersonal. In fact, Buffett is not a solo player, and he does like to delegate to trusted advisors, including his former associate Charlie Munger. Not only that, he's less strategic than Jobs and Musk, but he's a genius organizational manager. He knows his game is all about allocating capital wisely, staying out of the crowd and avoiding the hype, which is why he avoids short-term speculation and managed to dodge the dot-com bubble. But here's the thing. If there are managers who are total opposites from one another and they are successful in different ways, then as a manager myself, I wonder, are there critical mistakes a leader should try to avoid at all costs? Well, absolutely. There are a lot of mistakes. Let's admit it, being a top manager is real hard. Sometimes we're talking life or death business dilemmas when guiding a company. Do you keep your turf or roll the dice and chase other geographies? Do you invest into internal efficiencies or improve product features? Do you share the wheel or do you drive solo? Every choice is a gun on the table. And that's exactly why mistakes happen. But the first mistake actually is avoiding tough calls. Because we imagine leaders to be like characters out of the social network, so ballsy and cool, but the truth is that often leaders have no clue what to do next, especially when it comes to tough decisions. So some would do nothing. Like, what do you do if there is a black swan that could destroy the entire market? Do you lay people off or keep the team and burn through cash, hoping for better future? Do you double down on the existing products or do you introduce a new one? And if you do, who knows what's going to happen? A Harvard Business Review study shows how organizational paralysis when it comes to emergencies in a company can amplify the damage big time. Not only that, you might miss a great opportunity that your competitors are gonna get. I'm sure you've heard of Blockbuster, a DVD rental chain. For quite a while, they were kings. But when the DVD rental model began to decline and streaming began to emerge, they failed to see the opportunity and venture into this new business fast enough. Ultimately, this was their fatal mistake. The second problem is micromanagement. This is essentially a lack of trust in the team. People who worked with Steve Jobs cited that this was his main flaw as the manager.
So Steve Jobs would worry about even the beauty of a particular screw. He would wonder if, you're going to be able to see that screw on the outside of a case. How do we make it beautiful?
He was a genius, but he used to micromanage everything and didn't like delegating responsibilities. This is not uncommon in the early stages of a company. It's actually called founder mode. But in the long run, if you don't delegate, it becomes hard to scale. Third big mistake is bad risk management. Risks are those curveballs that come our way whether we see them coming or not. I mean, we all remember the 2008 crisis. That was the poster child for bad risk management on the global scale. Because a lot of companies refuse to do stress tests for systemic shocks. And even today, many companies underestimate events that are low in probability. It's like looking the other way, hoping the storm won't hit you. Except, sometimes it just does. For instance, at Lehman Brothers, there were a lot of warning signs related to the mortgage exposure, but the corporate culture rewarded risk and leverage, and the accounting policies were lax and misleading.
I want you to think Enron, accounting fraud, except this time the entire U.S. economy was brought to the brink, in part by one firm that was cooking its books. Enron basically brought California's power structure to the brink. Lehman, along with the rest of the banks, brought our entire country and the global economy to the brink.
And now, there could be another perfect economic storm on the horizon. I actually made a video about that just a few weeks ago. If you haven't seen it, I posted the link in the description. You can watch it next. The fourth mistake is ignoring feedback. See, managers can distance themselves from the rest of the team in a sort of a echo chamber. and very often they would ignore criticism and negative feedback. So CEOs start believing they're always right, and people around them get scared to tell them what they think. And this is really bad for corporate governance. For example, Adam Neumann founded WeWork in 2010 and quickly made it into a co-working empire. And things went pretty well until they didn't.
As late as summer 2019, the co-working company WeWork was considered one of the most valuable startups with a $47 billion price tag, more than Airbnb, Stripe, and SpaceX. But in just a few months' time, that valuation has vanished, and the very future of the company is in doubt.
The ambitious vision of WeWork is effectively dead.
The company went through major problems, and employees reported how questioning the CEO often led to being dismissed or marginalized.
My empathetic response, oh, we can't fire that person, it'll ruin their life, blah, blah, blah. Adam, in my view, his empathetic response wouldn't show up in that context. He'd be like, fire them immediately, like they did something bad,
So it wasn't a good idea to share your criticism to Neumann. But because I'm not Neumann, I would actually appreciate your feedback or suggestions, so feel free to share your comments. Of course, there are other mistakes that can be made, but these examples illustrate cases where even established companies with solid products can go wrong. Now, you're probably wondering, can you actually use all this in your business? Absolutely. But here's the real question for you. Do you want to manage people, or do you want to lead? Or are you still an employee of your own company? If you are, I'd strongly recommend to start delegating. I've even put together a delegation toolkit to help you free your time. The link is below, and the toolkit is absolutely free. But keep in mind, delegating or not, a great leader isn't always a great manager, and vice versa. Sometimes you need a visionary, someone who builds hype and sells dreams. Other times, you need a brain surgeon, the person who turns that dream into a working machine. It all depends on your industry, your goals, and the kind of person you are. If you are in tech or creative fields, charisma and bold bets are needed. But in finance, healthcare, or logistics, a steady hand usually wins. That's why Warren Buffett doesn't behave like Elon Musk, and Jobs didn't behave like Cook. And it's also why Apple needed both. Jobs to start the fire and Cook to keep it burning. The trick is knowing what kind of leader you are, what kind your company needs now and in the future, and when it's time to pass the torch. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the channel, please consider subscribing, and see you in the next video.